Wife swaps husbands in shocking twist. "So why do you come here if you're not having fun?" a woman's voice asked me. I looked around. On the bar stool next to me was a girl with very few clothes on. One of the dancers, I realized. I had seen her on stage a few minutes earlier. I didn't pay any attention to her. Even with almost no clothes on, she didn't interest me in any way. I guess it was my mood, and it didn't help that I was on my third whiskey and coke, or was it my fourth? I'd lost count, and I didn't care. "Go away," I growled. "So not only are you a sulking asshole, but you're an asshole too?" She actually laughed. I didn't answer, just sipped from my glass and beckoned to Sissy, the chubby bartender. She was already swishing a bottle of whiskey over a glass of soda, and Sissy knew me well. I figured she was trying to keep me sober, maybe hoping. Very unlikely. Not in my current mood. I'd been slipping into that state quite often lately and doing my best to mess up my life even more. "I'm not sulking," I finally said to the skinny girl as she sat there with an expectant expression on her face. "No, you're sulking. Either you got fired, or your wife is cheating on you, or the only stock that went down today was yours." Another wide grin appeared on her face. "I don't have a wife," muttered I. That wasn't quite true. My wife Patty was probably already with someone somewhere, and it certainly wasn't me. "Stay. I have to go to work, but you look like you need a friend." She stood up and headed towards the stage. "Looks like Lee likes you, Danny," said Sissy, handing me another soda and whiskey vaporizer. "On me." She smirked, turning around so I could see her left breast perched on the shelf of her bra. All of hers, too. Sissy did it all the time. A long time ago, I had managed to see both of them, and the rest of her, since she had sort of taken me home and molested me. I was single then, and it was fun. But we both knew it was just for fun, and nothing more. Friends with benefits, I think that's what it was called. Sissy was one of those women who was happy to be made love to. Until it was done to you by a woman who really enjoyed doing it, you just didn't have sex. The skinny girl on stage was moving vigorously, wearing only a crotch cloth and a few shiny pasties. I tried not to pay attention to her, but there were glitter on those stupid pasties. They kept catching the light, which drew my gaze. From the way she was looking in my direction, I realized she was trying to get my attention. The locals had their own rules. On stage, they had to cover their breasts, but behind the bar, in a blouse and skirt, there were no such rules, so the best sight was sitting behind the bar. Of course, you could go a few miles outside the city limits. There, the dancers wore nothing and spent most of the night with the men. But those were much noisier establishments. I didn't like them. Too many guys. They had bouncers, big ones. If you farted, they'd throw you across the parking lot. Even the cops rarely went out that far. It was safer downtown where there were no muggers or drunks looking for a fight. Plus, it was quieter in this joint. I could sit and drink. "Hey, wait for me," I heard, getting up to try and drive home. I knew that if I turned right and drove down 12th Street to Walker Road, there was little chance of meeting a cop. "What?" I asked, turning around. "You invited me to breakfast." The skinny man stood still. "No, I didn't invite you." "Yes, you did. You don't look that drunk to me." She clutched at my arm, waved at Sissy, who had a smirk on her face, and dragged me toward the door. That's how I met Lee. I wouldn't have paid attention to her for anything in the world, but I also wouldn't have been able to avoid talking to her for anything in the world. She just couldn't stand being ignored. We talked, God, how we talked. Eventually, I told her the whole story, but why I did it, I don't have an answer. Patty. I met her when she was working as a waitress. One of those people who watches her for days on end, finally working up the courage to ask her out. I later realized that there was no need to wait. If she liked the guy, she would go out with him herself. As it turned out, she liked me the most, and we ended up dating. I don't know why that happened. Maybe it was because I was the kind of guy who would not only spend an hour having sex, but also enjoy it. On that first date, Patty came over to my house. We sat in my living room, kissing and probing each other. Then she jumped up, saying she needed to freshen up. I heard the shower turn on, and she stayed in there for a full 20 minutes. I took this opportunity to slip into my half bathroom and wash up, since by then I was expecting her to start acting up. I got out and sat back down, then the shower turned off, and a few minutes later she came out, with no clothes on. Okay, to the point. Patty was very experienced, that much was obvious. She knew exactly how to attract a man, not that it took much effort on my part. I was barely 25 and Patty was only 19. Where she learned all this, I didn't know and I didn't ask. Sex in the early 70s was sort of a nice way to say hello or I like you. The fact that she was around didn't really bother me, I was around myself. Patty had one amazing talent. She knew how to make a man explode. Some would say that any woman knows how to do that instinctively. No, they don't. The vast majority can make a man explode. Of course they can. It's rare, and I don't know how to explain it. Something about the change of pace, of time. I know for a fact that I loved it, and I had never experienced sex like this before that moment. And here I sat, still half drunk, trying to explain it to a woman I'd barely met over a burrito at 2:30 in the morning? So, go on. What happened? Asked Lee. I realized I had fallen silent, my thoughts drifting somewhere away from everything that was going on. Sorry, I got distracted. That's okay. Tell me more. Lee sipped from her cup of hot tea and smiled. I started again, explaining that Patty was somewhat of a social animal. She liked having friends around. There always seemed to be someone at our house, often parties and sometimes just one or two couples. One night we had a nice party until everyone left early, since it was Wednesday and they had to work the next day. Bobby, my friend, stayed behind, as did Chuck, one of Patty's girlfriends. The girl's name was Sarah, and she was out of town somewhere and doing some unknown activity. The conversation became sexy and teasing. Patty was sitting in a soft blouse and slacks, her usual homemade look. A natural redhead, she wore round wire-rimmed glasses, had freckles everywhere, and perpetual bumps on her blouse since she didn't even have a bra. Bobby joked that he wished Sarah was around. He didn't mind working on his body. Sarah was now Chuck's girlfriend, and he replied that Bobby could only dream. We all laughed at Bobby teasing him. Then I opened my mouth and told them that Patty knew how to blow a man's mind with her skills. I guess I was bragging a little bit. Chuck said every woman on the planet knows how to do it. They're born with the skill. Not like Patty. She's so much better than everyone else, it's not even comparable. I chortled some more. There were a few more comments back and forth until finally Bobby challenged me to prove it. You asked for it, I told him. I looked at Patty and she smirked and then started laughing. Then she threw me a questioning look, realizing I was being serious. I just shrugged. I didn't like Bobby challenging me. I half expected her to say no, but instead she stood up. The next moment, Patty was kneeling in front of Bobby's chair, his pants down to his ankles. It didn't take her 2 minutes to make Bobby believe what I was saying, and then his eyes widened as she didn't stop. Jesus, muttered Bobby. Patty got up, went to the kitchen, came back with a wet towel, and wiped Bobby off. Now Chuck and I sat there looking at it. Chuck's eyes were as big as silver dollars. Dude, you were right. I've never had this much fun before. Bobby was pulling up his pants as he said this. Then Chuck started asking Patty how she was different from the others. She told him that everything she does is a secret. The next thing I knew, Patty was already pulling down my pants to demonstrate it on me. I didn't resist much, and in a few seconds Patty was already showing the two guys what she was doing and how she was doing it. Chuck then unzipped his pants and waited his turn. I guess we were all lost in the drink and the sexuality of the moment. Patty had one hand on my body and the other on Chuck's. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Bobby. This was getting out of control, but I didn't know what to say. Chuck was squeezing Patty's breasts right in front of me. I felt myself losing consciousness and sat up. Hey, I said. Chuck looked at me and pulled his hand away, and Patty let go, suddenly realizing it. That's where it stopped, and the rest of the evening we all acted kind of weird. I took some offense to Patty, and the next day I made a remark about her letting Chuck grope herself. "You started it yourself! You acted like you wanted it yourself!" she replied. Okay. So she was right. I should have let it go down before it even got to that point. I went over and hugged her, trying to defuse the situation, and soon we were in the bedroom, and I was trying my best to claim her as mine and mine alone. "Is that it?" asked Lee, seemingly silenced by me again. "No," replied I. "Well, go on then." I told Lee about Chuck. He was never good at keeping his mouth shut and seemed to have blabbed to Sarah about the stupid incident. He thought it was funny, but Sarah didn't think so. Sarah, of course, confronted Patty, and they got into an argument over Patty having sex with Chuck behind her back. That's exactly how she put it. Of course, it came right back to me. Patty and I had our own fight. Somehow I had become the asshole, the instigator of the whole mess. It was a little cold in our house for maybe 2 weeks, but then all of a sudden everything was forgiven. We had the kind of sex that's impossible to describe. Sarah and Chuck showed up one night acting like nothing had happened. I wasn't going to bring up the sore subject, so I just went with the flow. Then they stayed the night in our spare bedroom. They'd stayed over before, of course, but only a couple times. Sometime after midnight, I felt Patty crawl off the bed. Nothing unusual. She often got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I felt her slide back into bed and then felt her hand on my body. Things like that made me respond pleasantly. She was teasing, too. Soon she was hidden under the covers, and I felt her hand sliding over me. Something had clearly changed. I looked up sharply. It was Sarah. I knew it was her because I reached out to touch something I couldn't see, and my hand touched a breast that was too big to be my wife. "Why are you here?" said I loudly. "Shh, it's all right. Patty and I made up and decided that the best way to even things out was to switch," she said. It was so dark I couldn't make out her face, but she was close enough that I could tell she wasn't wearing any clothes. "Where's Patty?" I asked. "She's with Chuck. Relax. It's okay," said Sarah. "No, it's not okay." I got up and walked down the hall and opened the door. There was a nightlight burning in there, bright enough for me to see them. Patty was lying on her back on the bed having sex with Chuck. I hit the light switch, and after a couple seconds, they saw it was me standing there. Patty started to smile, but then realized I wasn't happy. "Danny, it's okay. You can hang out with Sarah." I turned and went to my bedroom, got my clothes, and got dressed. Sarah was sitting on the bed looking at me. The covers were pulled over her lower body, but her breasts were bare. All three of them were standing on the porch yelling for me to stop as I drove down the driveway. I would have given a lot of money for a picture like that, all three of them with no clothes on. I didn't even think about it at the time. It was 6 weeks earlier. Patty and I had tried to talk, but each time it ended in accusations and a big fight. Yes, it was partly my own fault, but the truth was that I wasn't really cheating with anyone, and she was cheating on me. By then I had a suspicion that Patty and Chuck were doing more than just a one-time thing. It was all too familiar that crazy night. "So where's your head at now? What are you going to do?" asked Lee. "I don't know. Probably get a divorce." "Seems to me you two should have talked before things got this far instead of dealing with it afterward," said Lee. "Yeah, I guess so." It was like after I told her the story, I didn't have anything else to say. We sat there sipping our hot drinks in silence. "So, do you want me to go home with you tonight?" finally asked Lee. Of course I do. I guess I'd already realized that was the way it was. Why else would she be sitting here with me in the first place? "You know, you first," she said with a smile. "What? You mean you haven't been with the guys?" "No, silly. I mean since I started dancing." At this, she laughed. Well, it was pretty clear at that point. Lee's body was completely different from Patty's. She was much more muscular, her breasts were much smaller and very firm. Lee was also very eager to have sex. and by the time we were in bed, most of the liquor I had consumed had worn off and the sun was already up. I woke up to her small hands caressing my body. "You're kind of big." Lee smirked, sliding her hands down my body. Just as we were fitting in, I heard a noise. In the background of what was happening, it didn't matter. The bedroom door swung open, and I looked up. Patty was standing there, and Sarah was right behind her, peering over her shoulder. Patty turned and walked out, pushing Sarah away in the process. "Man, what a cheater you are, aren't you?" said Sarah, and walked away as well. Now, 6 months later, I don't think Patty had a sense of humor about it. I know she didn't. I mean, I caught her cold having sex with Chuck. Why should she be mad at me when I'm having sex with Lee? That crazy manhandling that night started it all, and then there was the situation where Patty cheated on me with Chuck and no one said anything to me. I guess they just figured I'd go along with it, but the truth is, while Sarah was certainly pretty, I didn't want to be with her. And I certainly didn't want my wife to be with anyone else. Lee? She's still here. She has the perfect house. She's a great partner in bed. The day Patty surprised us, we were still married, but from my perspective, it was over. At least that's what I tell myself. But it's definitely over now. A couple weeks after that, Lee sort of moved in with me and she continued to do her work. I went to watch her dance a few times. It didn't bother me at first, but only later did it start to bother me. The agency she worked for invited her to the Apollo Club on the highway. Some of you may know of it. Yeah, completely unclothed. Lee went to work that same day. She worked the 3 to 6 shift. I got off work at 5 and went over there. When I got there, Lee was on stage dancing. She didn't see me, she was walking more than dancing, and she wasn't really revealing her body. She also didn't look very happy. I stood and watched for about 10 seconds. Then I walked over to the stage and told her to go get dressed. "What's going on?" she asked. "I'm taking you home, you just quit," said I. Lee smirked and reached out to hug me, but of course we couldn't do that. There were bouncers the size of freight trains. So she turned around and almost ran back to the stage. We got out of there alive, but barely. The manager was very angry, yelling something about how she would never work in this town again. Well, I was already planning on it. One of his goons followed us all the way to my car, and I realized he had gotten it into his head to do something about it. I turned and unzipped my jacket. He saw the small .38 caliber pistol I keep holstered. Yeah, I have one of those permits. The guy decided to go back to the club. Sometimes I think about Patty and her amazing talent. She could do things with her hands that would probably cost a fortune, and no one else even came close. Well, Lee's already learned I've been training her. At the same time, she's training me. It's actually a lot of fun. I also heard that Patty and Chuck are together now. That made me stop and think for a while. Then I realized that I didn't care. The end! Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.